Justin, thank you so much, Justin Bean, for being here today. I saw
Thanks for
your
having me.
book on the internet, and I thought that was the best title I've ever seen. And I had to ask you to come to the podcast today, to this dialogue with you. And I'm super excited to explore the book with you. Justin is the author of What Could Go Right. He's an expert in sustainability and innovation, and I think you're a hardcore optimist, and he's working to envision and create a thriving world. In few sentences, that's how I would describe you. So again, thank you for being here today, Justin, and tell us about your background and your career experience.
Yeah, sure. And I guess I'll start with the optimism piece, right? So
Yeah.
I think I'm an optimist about some things and I'm a pessimist about others. But I think when it comes to creating a better future, it doesn't really matter, right? What matters is that you create a vision and then you get busy working on building that vision. So sometimes people use optimism to sort of dismiss an idea or dismiss a path, and think of it as naive Pollyanna optimism. And I think that's something that we need to make sure that we're getting across, is that this is, when we're talking about building a more sustainable and equitable future, it's really about pragmatic approaches to building that future and collaborating to envision it so that we're building one that works for everyone. So just, I always want to,
Yeah.
talk about that because I feel like it's such an important mindset shift into that takes people away from like, well, you guys are just naive, we're realists, or oh, you guys are just, pessimists and party poopers. We want to go
Right.
and build a better future. But really, I think when you get people together and talk about what you're actually going to create together, it transcends some of those boundaries and brings people together from across the political spectrum and experience and everything else. Um,
Absolutely. Mhm.
so anyway, so I'll introduce
Yep.
myself.
Yeah,
But
yeah, and absolutely, and I agree. And it's not simply like be thankful for what you have and just see the half a full bottle type of thing. Is like, no, we're talking about like creation.
yeah,
They sit down and imagine and vision, and that's the greatest degree of being positive, right? To
totally.
envision new things. It's not just simply like be a conformist, right, with what you
Yeah,
have right now.
yeah.
And how did you think about writing the book? It's just like was an inspiration that you had in your heart, or just kind of your career path just led you into this?
Yeah, I think like you, I wanted to take action and spread some ideas and help empower other people to have the tools and some good examples of how they could make a positive impact to create a more sustainable future and a better world. And so my background, I studied sociology, economics, and business when I was younger. As have always been looking for this sort of combination of how do we take this existing system that we have, right? Because there's a lot of really good things about the world that we've created as humans. All the technology and the systems that we've created have a lot of strength and capability. And um, and instead of just like burning that down to the ground and starting over fresh, there's a lot that we
Mhm.
can do to shift it into a new direction that ends up in more participatory capitalism and in ways that really help people thrive while creating a sustainable future. So, after that, I moved to Japan for a few years and I taught English and I worked at
Mhm.
Mitsubishi. Um, and I decided to come back to the US to get my MBA in sustainable management because I really saw that this movement was emerging that was taking that pragmatic approach and saying, yeah, actually, environmentalism and doing something good for the planet doesn't have to be all about nonprofits and policy. Actually, business is, 80% ish of all human activity. If we can convert that to something that's sustainable and show that there are good opportunities there, that's how I think you shift the majority of humanity. So that's why I came back to the US, moved to San Francisco, went to get my MBA in sustainable
Mhm.
management, worked at a startup that was doing some work in smart cities. That got acquired by an Austrian intelligent transportation firm. Did some independent consulting with early stage
Mhm.
startups around strategy and marketing and product, and then did some design thinking work with IDEO, the design thinking and strategy firm, and then started another Japanese conglomerate doing smart cities and smart spaces. So all kinds of ways that they're using artificial intelligence, computer vision, 3D LiDAR and things like that to make transportation more efficient, to improve the efficiency of the ways that we operate throughout, airports and transit, et cetera. And then have been working in sustainability for several years, helping other Fortune 500s and governments to attain their net zero goals. So I think what's happened is that a lot of these organizations have set these really ambitious net zero goals and sustainability goals, which is awesome. But now they're getting to a point where they're saying, but how do we do this? How do we implement this? What are the actual technologies we're going to use to get there? What are the strategies we need to take? Who are the partners that we need to work with? And so now I think it's becoming about implementation and action, which is a great development moving forward. So, I've just been privileged to be in the room for a lot of these really interesting conversations around, what's happening in the world and where sustainability is really reaching the top echelons of these giant corporations and these big organizations and all of these governments. And, I, like everybody else, have some conversations with college students or young founders or professionals or, retirees. And there's just so much cynicism and pessimism in the world. And people, I think, are not really aware of how big the shift is that's going on under our feet. And I wanted to be able to bring those insights out to the people that are getting their career started or working in corporate America and looking for new paths and new meaning in their careers and really wanting to make a difference. And so I took, a lot of the learnings and insights that I've been lucky enough to be a part of or to see in my career and put those into the book so that people can have a sort of window into what's going on and how it's working. So the book's really kind of diced up into 3 sections. The first one is really about that mindset of, instead of thinking about how terrible things are and why the world is, so wrong and everything else, thinking about what could go right and switching to an empowered mindset of, instead of just solving problems and thinking about how bad things are, how about we envision what the ideal is that we actually want to live in, whether that's the world or the ideal solution or company that can solve a problem, and then start backcasting or moving backwards from there to figure out what the steps are that we can take to move in that direction. And that's not only a more empowering mindset, it gives us something to do.
That's typically what we do in capitalism, and most of the time is less, we look for a problem, right? Like you said, but that's a very reactive approach. So you're right that instead of just waiting for the problem to arise and now we're going to think about a solution and create this business or whatever, why don't we start with the end in mind? We want to be happy, we want to be healthy, we want to create these cities or whatever, and backtrack, right?
Yeah.
But that takes a different mindset, and that's what you work in the first part of the book, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And you're exactly right. I think that at a certain part in the process, you need to start thinking about the problems and why we aren't at that ideal yet. And that's where kind of engineers can step in and start thinking about how to solve the problem. But often we get stuck in that part of the process without really thinking 10 years out, 20 years out, 50 years out of, what that ideal really is that we want to achieve. And some of these things are achievable within a few years, right? It just depends on what you're talking about. But it's really important to have that shared vision so that we all know that we're moving in the right direction instead of just kind of going off and doing these random problem sets. So that's the first part, is that mindset shift. And I think that's just important to lead with. And then the second part is around all of the sociological and technological trends that are empowering startups and Fortune 500s and all kinds of organizations with opportunities in the world of building sustainability and building a more equitable world. And so there's such an enormous shift of empowerment from all the technology and tools that are available to us today.
Can we talk about some of those, the main ones?
Yeah, I think we saw a lot of them shift forward into our lives over the pandemic. So remote work is one that's
Zoom, like we're talking on Zoom right now.
Exactly.
People didn't even know what this was, right?
Yeah. And we've had this technology for a while, right? We've had Skype, we've had AIM for a long time. We've had all these different technologies, but it wasn't so widely adopted and validated that we can have these large international shared teams that are actually working pretty efficiently in a distributed fashion. And so in a way, I think there's a shift from these sort of hierarchically controlled command and control organizations to more flat distributed and emergent strategy corporations or emergent strategy organizations that can sort of grow from the ground up. And then that's being also empowered by just data everywhere with the Internet of Things and with analytics on everything, with the ability to process that and figure out the insights from it, what we should do, what actions to take. And then things like blockchain and distributed autonomous organizations that allow these operations to be carried out, some automated, but some in ways that are run by the very people who own the network and own the system. And so I think there's new business model innovations that are coming out also that, much like Silicon Valley startups, give people a stake in the growth. And so what a startup will do is, because they can't pay very high wages, they'll give out stock options and ownership in the company. And then when you own a part of the company, you're so much more passionate about its success and interested in its future and everything else. And so as I think more and more of the work that we do is shifting into this ownership economy and more participatory capitalism, where we're not just coming to the table for our wages, we're coming to the table for ownership, and we're coming as leaders in these organizations to help them work. And so that also ends up being a more empowered, distributed organization that can achieve its goals well without the need for, command and control organizational structures. So I think that's one that's really powerful.
To give an example of that, and then we can go into others, like that would be like, I'm hired by a company and the company is like giving me shares maybe in the past, and now they're giving me like tokens or whatever you want to call it. If you were talking about blockchain, is that what you're talking about, for example?
Yeah, that's one way that it could work, right? And so there's a business model called ESOP, which is like basically a co-op, right? The employees kind of own the store, right?
Yep.
And I think that's one shift out, if you think of it in terms of concentric circles. So traditional is sort of that middle circle, and that's the owners of the store being the investor or the family that started it, and then you pay the employees and then the customers come to the store. So then a co-op or an ESOP brings the employees into the fold and makes them partial owners of the store. And you see, much higher rates of engagement, much higher rates of responsibility, and, more creative ideas that come out of that. And I think what happens with blockchain and with this sort of ownership model is not only the employees, but the customers also own part of the store, right? And so imagine an Uber or a Lyft where, you are engaged in the use of the tokens for delivering, driving people around or giving out deliveries, making deliveries, but also taking rides. And as that network grows, the tokens of that network become more valuable. So you as a customer and you as a driver have essentially shares in the company. And as that grows, everyone shares in the wealth as it grows.
I really like that. That's really cool.
Model.
That's really cool, because people that are using the system are part of the success of that company. So in a way, they should be entitled to at least a portion of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a way for, us all to share in the wealth that we're creating, right? Because as a customer, you're creating wealth for that network.
Exactly.
And for that company. And, the money has to come from somewhere. Somebody's got to be a customer, but hopefully it provides you value. So you're using it. And then you're going to recommend it because it's providing value, just like a traditional company. And so I think that's a really big shift that brings more cooperation and is part of that cooperation paradigm that you talk about.
It is, because I thought about this many times. Imagine like Amazon, right? Or these other like huge businesses. If they got in the mindset of like giving back to the people more, I'm sure they do a little bit already, but people would like become like the biggest fans of Amazon. But right now, everybody, or not everybody, but many people use Amazon because it's convenient and that they have to in a way. It's become like too big to fall, I guess. But many people don't like Amazon. They are like kind of like against Amazon, because it has become this huge thing. But if they saw that the business really cares for those at the bottom in a way, the customers, the retailers, and they take care of everybody, like that will lift the boats, And then if Amazon does it, like other big businesses have to do it. So it's like this domino effect, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I would add that not only could they take a shift to, be more caring for the customers and for the people, that they could see an opportunity in it. It could even be a business opportunity for them, right? That like bringing more people in, allowing more of these sellers to do what they want, providing the training so that the quality is higher in some of the products in the stores that are on Amazon would actually empower a lot of their customers and create more opportunity on the Amazon network or marketplace. And
Exactly.
so I think it's a big opportunity for a lot of established businesses to shift to this model. And that's where a lot of the growth is going to come from shifting to sustainable models that are faster growing markets for their products and services, and also shifting to these distributed models because it creates opportunity for everyone in that system. And so they're going to expand their own opportunity and therefore the opportunity of the larger company.
I agree 100%. And that's something I talk about a lot, is like cooperation versus competition, right? And cooperation actually brings about more abundance. So
Right.
if companies tapped into that in the long term, of course, in the short term, if you compete and you like outpace your competition, you're going to be better off that quarter.
Yeah.
But in the long term, like abundance and cooperation creates even more, and this is makes the system, you talk about the system, makes us stronger, right? Every
Right.
player in the system is happy in a way, right? So
I
I agree
agree.
100%.
And that's why our species is successful, right? I mean, sure,
Hmm.
we've got large brains, we've got these opposable thumbs, right? We've got
Yeah.
the ability to speak and communicate with each other, and those are huge game changers for a species. But if we were a competitive solitary species, we'd still be like octopus, right?
Yeah.
And we'd
Yeah.
be out like living alone in the forests and the trees and the caves, and we wouldn't be this, incredible species that's created a civilization. But because we cooperate with each other, and
Hmm.
because we share the knowledge and resources that we have in our villages at first, and then in our larger communities and cities, um, that's why we're successful, right? In addition to these other sort of biological advantages that we have. And I think, and within that is competition, as you mentioned, right? There's competition within partnerships and families and between tribes and between groups. But I think we've kind of moved to this paradigm over the last few hundred years, let's say, several hundred years, that sees the world as needing to be mostly competition. And competition is the only thing that drives success and growth. And I think it's still an important part of the equation. And it's kind of fun, right? Within bounds. When when your life doesn't depend on it, competition is
Right.
pretty fun and it can be invigorating.
Exactly.
But cooperation is the overarching paradigm that we're
Yeah.
operating within. And if we lose sight of that, I think we lose a lot of opportunities and we end up creating larger catastrophes like climate change and social dissolution and issues like
Right.
that.
100%. And when I came here to America, and especially in business, I started hearing the word competition, be competitive. And is
Yeah.
that mantra, but like you said, overall, humanity is what it is. And you talk about this in your book, like
Mhm.
we think like we're like better off, worse off than 50 years ago, but no, we actually like we're on the
Amazing.
uptrend, right? Things are a lot better.
Yeah.
So we have
Mhm.
accomplished so much, and primarily is because we have learned to cooperate with each other,
Right.
and
Yeah.
we just forget about that. And sure, you can have the fun and the games of competition, and you talk about this in your book as well, about finite versus
Mhm.
infinite games. And to me, that's the key of this thing, we're in an infinite game. Do you want to talk more about that and
Sure.
how we need to?
Yeah, and
I think
so
it's
this
really important.
concept of finite versus infinite games, I think, is really interesting, and it's kind of based on this idea that these finite games are these smaller games that we generally play, and you can think of a game of basketball or sometimes a game
Exactly.
of business, right, where you're thinking in short term, and the end of the game is when someone wins, and that means someone else loses, and it's clearly defined, the rules are understood, and the goal is to finish play and to win the game. With infinite games, it zooms out and looks at very different incentives and different interests. So the goal of an infinite game is to continue play as long as possible, because you want this thing to continue on. So think about society, or one of the examples that's often used is the Vietnam War, right? The people living in Vietnam were playing an infinite game because this was their home, this is their country, and they were going to be there one way or the other. the foreign powers, whether it was France before the US or the US who came in later, were playing these more finite games where they were just looking to, end the conflict so that they could control the resources or have a geopolitical influence or whatever you believe the wars were about. And it puts that player at a disadvantage because they're playing this sort of short-term defined game. They're stuck within rules and boundaries, whereas the infinite players often have fewer boundaries. They can be more creative, and they have a stronger interest in the game continuing. And so in the case of a war like that, it just kind of bleeds out the finite game competitor. So if we, I don't like these war analogies very
Right,
often.
but
I think
they
it's one that makes
illustrate,
it easy to understand.
it makes it easy to understand. Yeah. And
So if we're
I wanted to go ahead. Sorry.
So if we're talking about business, I think it's actually a really helpful framework as well, because we often think in terms of the next quarter or the next win or the next bonus or the next financial report. And those are good sort of milestones or finite games within the infinite game, but it's so short-sighted. And when we start zooming out and looking at the infinite game of keeping that company going in the longer term, we have to start thinking about not only those short-term wins and those defined sort of victories, but more about how this organism operates within the larger ecosystem, right? Because all businesses are dependent on an economy within which they operate. Those economies are dependent on a society or a civilization within it operates. And then that civilization is dependent on the ecology within which it operates, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if these businesses have all these externalities that are damaging this ecology that's surrounding all of us, and then that trickles down into civilization or societal issues and into economic disruptions and problems, and that'll trickle down into the business, and the whole game ends around them. There's no customer to have, there's no quarter to win, because the whole game is over,
Exactly.
and that's a tragedy.
Right. I wanted you to talk about it because actually it's something that I also talk about in the book coming up that I have in this
Yeah,
year.
that's
And I
exciting.
thought thank you. And when I was reading your book, I thought like, wow, I really believe also in this idea of the collective mindset or collective unconscious or something,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's who psychologist, I don't think it was Freud, but and I was like, wow, we are connected here with this because to me, like, there's nothing wrong with competition. When I
Mm-hmm.
talk about like games, a basketball game, everybody likes to have fun, and you need a winner
Yeah.
and you need a loser, and that's
Right.
fine.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about the economy, or we're talking about education, or envisioning a new way for our planet, right? That's not a finite game. That's an infinite game. And
Right.
we need to just stay here. We're going to be here for the long run, right? We can change the rules and all those things. So in that type particular instance, we need to collaborate, to cooperate, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And then you start thinking about, how is this action that I'm going to take, or how is the strategy that I'm thinking about going to affect that infinite game and that longer term continuation of play? Then you start
exactly.
making different choices. And I think that's the important part.
And especially, for example, also with the environment, right?
Mhm.
Sustainability. That's just just forever. I mean, we need to be sustainable. So that's right there, definition of an infinite game, right?
Right.
What can we do now? Let's change the rules, or let's change the way we interact with the environment to make it that we can continue, right?
Totally.
And what other like technologies that we were talking about that, right? We are seeing in the world that can transform and accelerate this vision and bring it to reality.
I think there's so much going on in the world of technology. It's hard to sort of nail down any one of them, but I think it's this convergence of all of these technologies that
Mm-hmm.
are enabling more. And there are these sort of platforms that come out, right, that enable innovation on top of them. So for example, the internet was an enabling platform that came out. Great, we can, find information on the internet. And then, websites started growing off of that, and those became more and more differentiated and more specific. And then mobile platforms came out, and that was another enabling platform. And then we had all kinds of apps and ways of
Yeah.
collaborating with each other and tools that were on that. So these enabling platforms start coming out and booming and booming. And now I think we're seeing this sort of next layer of all of the creators that are out there, because there's so many tools to create, and no code, low code, all of that, that you can create things like podcasts. You can be that there's room for nearly an infinite amount of people to create their own message and their own channel that resonates with many people, right? Because we now have access to nearly 8 billion people, and they have access to us back and forth. I think that's creating this new wave where everyone becomes a prosumer in an economy. So we always talk about being consumers and taking in, but these enabling platforms are sort of enabling everyone to be a prosumer or a creator and add something new into the economy. And, you know, if you ever watch a group of kids play, right? Or if you're ever, you know, take your kids down to the playground and see them play, there's not one kid that's not creative, right? Like everybody's
Right.
playing those games and getting excited. And even if you're an introvert, right, you're also very creative. Actually, some introverts are probably more creative than anybody.
Probably, yeah.
And so I think there's just that's inside of us all the time. It's just that we learn to sort of shut it down. We learn to like conform into these rule-based systems, which was very, very helpful during the first industrial revolution, right? We kind of talk about this in the education chapter, that the education we have today was built in the time of needing factory workers to, you know, come from agriculture and then work in factories and do these, you know, specific regimented jobs that needed rules and order and obedience. And so that's what our education system has been sort of molded around. But we were emerging into a new era where we need everyone, all hands on deck, to come up with solutions and innovations to the climate challenges that we face, the political challenges we face, the social issues that we face. And we now have tools to do that. So I think the, you know, one, the people, the individuals who will be the, you know, big winners, but also, you know, everyone can be involved in this, you know, this next economy that's being built. And it's going to require people to be more proactive and creative and problem solve and work together in teams and groups. And it's less defined. It's more of an infinite game, right? You need to sort of create the rules, think about the rules. Do they fit? Let's create better ones and think more as a leader than what we had in the past. So it's a big mindset shift civilization wide that we need. And I think it's already starting to happen. So I think that's a really exciting trend.
It is, but it's difficult at the same time because, like you said, we're not used to be the creator. We're used to consume. And I think most of the technology people use are just to spend time, to entertain themselves. And I wish, like, sometimes instead of like being like scrolling through kitty pictures or whatever, which at the end of the day,
not the cat videos. The cat videos are great.
The cat, I mean, those are great because at the end of the day, you need something to relax and have fun, you know?
Sure, yeah.
But it's so much. I wanted to ask you about technology because I see such potentiality, so much potential to do things with the technology, but it seems like we're stuck, you know, like we have these phones and we can put people on the moon, but the progress that we actually see, we have it and it's good, it's positive, but we could have so much more, right? And why is that? Can you put your thoughts on this? Why is that? We could have much more progress. You know?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's difficult, but I think it's mostly that we're in transition. And so, you know, that model that we talk about in the book with the 3 horizons, right? You've got kind of a current paradigm that is the dominant paradigm, but it's sort of losing its fit for purpose, right? It doesn't quite work anymore. We know that it's, you know, it's not really adapted to what we need, and it slowly declines over time. And then you've got the second horizon, or let's start with the third. So then you got the third horizon, which is what that future will be. So if we talk about envisioning the future and what the ideal is, you know, we can see further out what that ideal might be as we start envisioning and thinking about it. And then the second horizon are all those little innovations that take place to help build a superior alternative to that initial paradigm. But as it rises, there's a lot of conflict. So let's take an example like fossil fuels. Fossil fuels were an incredible discovery and innovation that created immense abundance for humanity, right? Created basically everything we see here is pretty much an oil party, right?
Yeah.
With all this population growth and all of the tools and pharmaceuticals and transportation we have around us. But it's losing its fit for purpose, and it has a lot of negative externalities, right? It's creating a lot of bad climate change disasters. When you're driving your gas guzzler down the street, you're spewing toxic fumes in people's faces at children's height, right? So we see
Mm.
higher levels of asthma. There's a lot of health issues. So we know there's a lot of problems with it, and it creates a lot of geopolitical conflict because we have to go and have partnerships with countries abroad to gain access to those resources. Often there's a lot of political complexity, and we've had a lot of wars basically around resources in the 20th century and beginning of the 21st. And so it's losing its fit for purpose. As we know that we now need more secure energy that's locally generated, we need cleaner energy that comes from these abundant resources that are all around us, whether it's solar, wind, wave, you name it. We know we need better, cheaper, cleaner fuels. And so for the second horizon, there's tons of innovations. You got biofuels, different types of solar panels, different types of turbines, people competing to win this future. But in that changeover is this conflict. And this is where the conflict kind of peaks, is as these alternatives become available and this first paradigm is kind of struggling to stay relevant, struggling to stay alive. And we saw that with, in the 70s and 80s and probably more, with some of the biggest oil companies in the world that actually funded disinformation research to show that, or to push the idea that climate change isn't really happening. And then, once we kind of got past that, they said, well, maybe it's happening, but it's not the fault of humans. It's not the fault of fossil fuels. And so, they funded research that would support that idea, even though they knew, right? The people that were there knew that it was happening, but they were trying to defend their business interest. And that, I think, will be studied for a long time. But so that conflict, I think, is in a high state as we transition. So I think, what you said around the technology creating a lot of problems, I think we're in that sort of initial conflict phase where we're having a divergence, right? And so people who are kind of living in the old way are over consuming, and we're getting addicted to our smartphones, and there's artificial intelligence that is working against us to addict us to our phones, right? And this is a problem that is an opportunity for someone to solve, but it's a real problem. And I think we're seeing a divergence of people who leverage these tools for creation and for fitness and for health and for their own self-actualization that are, over and above empowered by this technology to be way better at what they do. And then there are people who are getting kind of trapped in the consumption of this technology, and their mental health, their physical health, their social health are all declining, and that's terrible, because all those things are going to lead to all kinds of health issues and mental problems, and we're already seeing
the options are out there. It's just more difficult to navigate. But if you want and you have like something in mind, you can like go and learn about anything. You can go and have 1 hour free class, fitness class, or meditate or whatever, or you can go and scroll through your TikTok. And so the options are out there. But kind of like to recap what you were saying, if I understood you, is like we have these businesses and these corporations that they have an interest as well, and they don't want to let it go, and they want to put out propaganda or whatever, and they will keep those the reins in until maybe they are like involved enough so that they can also leverage and like profit in a way. Maybe that's not exactly what you said. I'm just putting my spin on this. But in a way, it's like what I see is like these corporations are like, hold on, I'm not going to like dismantle my whole like oil industry here yet. It's billions industry. I'm going to start investing in electric or in other alternatives. And when I'm ready, I'm going to release this thing, release the beast, and then progress is going to be much faster. But in a way, we are like captive, right? A little bit. These
and we depend on it, right? I mean, it's if we shut down oil today,
right,
things would collapse. Right?
So no question.
We need to make the transition. It's just that they were holding off for a long time because they were protecting their business interest. But I think in a way that the technology is creating trouble, like we've seen, social media leading to some disinformation and to people protesting and things like that, which in some cases are really good, in other cases are misled. But I think that's also creating this feedback loop that's making it harder and harder for big organizations to do things like that. You can lose your brand value overnight from a bad, right? Or
True.
if something like this is discovered, a lot of these companies are terrified actually of of being labeled as a greenwasher, as being seen as being ethically unfair to people. And so I think they're starting to realize that, one, it's the right thing to do, but two, it's in their business interest to do the right thing because they're much more transparent than they used to be, and not by choice, right? Because of social media, because of how much we can see about the world, and it's only getting more and more transparent. The people, let's say, have the power to bring down these big organizations really quickly, and so they need to behave much more ethically. They need to behave more sustainably. And I think that's a really positive move. And those that haven't quite figured it out think that they can still sort of operate, in the shadows, or finding out pretty rapidly that, basically everything they do is, or they should operate as if everything they do
Known,
is
right?
in public. Yeah.
And I agree. And you talk about this in your book. You talk about transparency, how everything is much more transparent. It's public, basically. But I'm gonna play the devil's advocate here
Please.
because at the same time, there's so much information
Mm-hmm.
that people have been like desensitized from hearing that company X, Y, or Z has done this, or politician has done this, or this party or that party. Like there is so much out there that it almost has become like normal that they have like everybody has dirty hands and it's just what it is, And
And they
so
might move on the next week because there's a new outrage to get, outraged about, right?
exactly. So it's just like I see what you mean, and it's true. Maybe the younger generations will change that. I think that's also people of different age approach these things differently as well. I think you talk in the book about the younger people like moving on quicker from a brand. They don't have that loyalty. Like, oh, I always bought these, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna keep going to. Um, but gosh, sometimes I feel like people should like react more and push back on these some of these negative things that come out and are public. Uh,
Maybe, yeah. And we should find, again, better alternatives, right? And so like one negative that's come from this is that companies are now doing green hushing, which is that, they've actually done some really great sustainability projects. They've made a lot of progress, but they don't want to announce it. They don't want to put a press release out because they're afraid of being labeled greenwashers. And so, they're quietly
yeah,
doing these things in the background, which is great. But they're not sharing their progress. They're not sharing their updates and everything because they're afraid of the crowd. Excuse me. And and that's bad too. We have to find a balance to where we can realize that, these are just people working in groups, right? Who are just
yep.
paid a salary to do their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And there's very few people, if any, that can just say like, now this will be done, and just sort of command, right? Even a CEO has to go through a ton of change management to get a giant corporation to do what he thinks the strategy should be, or what that leadership that leadership team thinks should be done. And so yeah, and so there's all kinds of like second order, third order impacts from these technologies and new ways of thinking about it. So yeah, these are all problems to solve. Also, you've got state and non-state actors that have figured out how to spread propaganda through social media with fake bots and disinformation campaigns and all of that. And so it's no longer, again, like a monolithic strategy where they're like, there's a radio and there's a TV, and we will push this message through the TV.
And even the fact checkers in theory were supposed to be playing a good role, like turn out that also can be like not really doing that. Yeah. So and you talk about the CEOs and all these people like being humans, and that's it. That's very important to recognize that there's a human factor here. And this is why I like to talk about ethics, or call it something else if you want, but that awareness of sometimes what is right and what is wrong. And it's not just all like market driven, we have to recognize what is the right thing to do in the long term, and sometimes that takes special type of education or a special type of values, so value changing is very important. what are the values that we need to embrace to accelerate the happening of this new world?
I
Because
mean, in my
technology is not
mind,
going to do it for us, right? We
yeah,
use technology, and it depends on us, right? That's what you
yeah.
were saying.
I think it's an interrelational cycle, right? And so the technology interacts with the culture and the values interact with the technology, and they change each other as we go along, right? And so it's a cycle that moves. And so I think in terms of values, I mean, I'm just a big fan of compassion and seeing others as human beings, right? Like whether it's a homeless person that you've walked by on the street and think, what would I feel like being there? I might want a sandwich or some help. Or if it's a CEO of a major company that, maybe is well intentioned, but like has certain interests and demands from investors and the board, and thinking, having empathy and thinking from other people's shoes and talking to them and interacting with them, I think is the best way to, understand where they're coming from, even if you disagree, and then engage in a way that is proactive. And that's how I think we get to somewhere better, right? Like we've had all these political divisions for a long time, and it can be really frustrating to talk with someone who's on the, other side of the political aisle,
Mm.
especially if they're, extremely, uh, if they're extreme in their beliefs and they're extreme in their, vigor behind the beliefs, right? But it's less helpful to completely disengage and completely dismiss people because they have some kind of belief. I think it's more around finding what you have in common so that you can tolerate each other and potentially work together on a solution. Because I think the reality is that the vast majority of people want a healthy future for the planet and for their children. There are very few people who are actually, psychopathic, sociopathic, and say,
Yeah.
no, destroy all nature. I don't care about the children. I don't care about the future. Right. That's a tiny fraction of people who have mental
Right.
health
It
problems.
just happens that maybe that tiny fraction is at the very top sometimes, that's
Sometimes,
it's like
but I think it's more about
okay,
the
like
structures within which they operate,
yeah.
that the structures within which they operate guide a lot of their behavior. And so to me, it's more about how do we change those structures so that even if it's someone who doesn't share the same values and beliefs as me is in that place, they're going to take actions that are positive and that create a positive outcome. Because you can even have the most, moral, ethical person in a situation that has, very difficult um, incentives, and they'll make an unethical decision, right? And so for me, it's about how do we create a path for people, one, for people who care, and we need more people who care, but two, even for people who don't care, right? Like I'm never going to convince some people that climate change is one of the biggest problems of our generation and of the next century. And even the next few years, we're already seeing, increasing numbers and strength of storms that are causing billions and billions of dollars worth of damage. But if I, talk with someone about their business interest and I say, I don't care what you think about climate change, getting into the EV space is the biggest business opportunity you can have.
Mm.
And guess what? You need to source your lithium from a place that's doing it sustainably and ethically, because people are going to come after you if you don't. And they see that business opportunity, they run with it. The world's better off, right?
Right.
Um,
But definitely going back to the compassion, as one value, like,
yeah,
because I think if we had that compassion, all the CEOs, all the people that are making decisions, things would accelerate. And I'm
I
going to
agree.
give you a quick
Yeah.
example. The other day, I was talking with a developer here where I live, and he's got a plan to buy land and develop these tiny homes that are self-sustainable for
Mm,
the homeless in the city. I mean,
right.
he can do it super cheap, super efficient. He just needs people in the city of Charlotte, where I live, to agree to this.
Hmm.
But long story short, like some people didn't want that to happen because they will, on the other side of things, will lose some
Mhm.
opportunities.
Right.
So that's where your compassion, your heart comes in and says, no, we're doing this no matter what. And I don't
Hmm.
care what the system is around me. And you said, like, sometimes you're just pushing to these decisions, right? But we're all humans. At the end of the day, we have to turn and say no. And if we had all those things, man, things would accelerate because, like you say, like with the technology, wow, we can do so much. In your book,
Yeah.
you talk about um, UBI as well, which I think goes hand in hand with the hierarchy of needs of Maslow, which you
Mhm.
also talk about, and how covering those bases is so important, right? To be able to go up.
Yeah.
Do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Sure. And I think it connects really well to your point, right?
Mm-hmm.
That when you've got dinner at the table taken care
Right,
of, you know where your rent's coming from, it's a lot easier to make ethical decisions. And
right,
so, if
exactly.
you're struggling to survive, you're going to kind of go into survival mode. And then, what matters is
It's like a jungle, you know?
exactly it turns life into a jungle of survival. And I think UBI is one solution that's out there that makes a lot of sense, especially as we transition to a world that's more automated and it's more and more difficult for more and more people to participate in the kind of existing economic structure that we have. And if we found a way to do it that took care of people's needs and helped them to create, we found countries that have a stronger safety net actually are more entrepreneurial, right? People are more willing to take those risks when they know that they've got a base to come back to, whereas
Exactly.
it's
Creativity,
harder.
you know?
Yeah.
Right.
And that puts more hands on deck for the solutions. And so I think the concept that I really liked, that I talked about in the book, is this concept of omnithrive. And I kind of thinking of society as a bit of an organism. And so when you think about your body, your liver is not in competition with your lungs for survival, right?
Right.
Like your brain is not fighting with your digestive tract to own your body,
I want
right?
more resources. Send me
Yeah, give
everything,
me
you
those. I'm going to
know?
win. Yeah.
Right.
Because when it does, we call it cancer or we call it some other
Right.
disease and you die pretty quickly.
Right. Right.
Right. So, and a very small problem, like anybody who's had a kidney stone
Yeah.
knows that just a small disruption to that system can shut everything else down. And so I think society is similar, where if we want to thrive at our maximum as society, what does that look like for an organism? An organism thrives when each of its organs are thriving at its maximum point or its optimal point. They're getting optimal amount of resources, optimal amount of food and oxygen and everything else. And I think society's the same. And sort of organically, what we've come to is kind of the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer. It's difficult to have social mobility and to enter the economy for a lot of people. And there are some paths like education, there's some paths like career training or professional schools, and that's great. But if you go to the outskirts of Nairobi or Delhi or other places that don't have those paths, it's much more difficult. And even many places in the US. So the concept is, if we sort of change our mindset to thinking about society as more of an organism, and that we actually will be much more successful as a society if all parts of our society are thriving, then like that just accelerates everything. We can transition to a sustainable, ethical society and economy very rapidly in a way that creates more wealth than we ever have seen in human history. And we just saw an enormous creation of wealth in the last century and a half of human history, that had never been seen before. And I think we're looking at the opportunity to double that again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And create even more wealth, especially with artificial intelligence, with the digitization of everything, and the
Yeah.
ability for us to connect as a global society with all kinds of our different societies and civilizations and cultures intact. We don't want a monoculture. But yeah, I think it's the biggest opportunity any human beings have ever seen. And I'm super excited about it. And I think there's a lot of people who are also excited about it. And we're all trying to figure out, so what
Yeah.
do we do? How do we do this? And that's what we were trying to accomplish with the question of what could go right.
Yeah. And I think you hit on the nail right now, which is to see that what is good, let's say in a city, right? You want everybody in the city to thrive, or in your
Mm-hmm.
country, you know, because that's
Yeah.
also good, it's good for the system. And we would every part of the system to be good and strong, like in the body, right? You don't want the liver to suffer or the brain. So it's
Right.
the same. It just brings about back the abundance.
Yeah.
So I think we need to go away from these ladder of success, individual ladder of success so much, I'm great. I'm here in my castle and I don't care what's happening around me,
Right.
And we just need to really get out there and like push for abundance for everyone because it's in our own benefit too. It's
Yeah.
like seeing like the organism that you were talking about. And I
Yeah.
think that's
And even
just
for
change of
businesses.
mindset for
Yeah.
businesses as well.
Yeah. You need customers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Customers need to have money to buy
And
your
it's
stuff.
and
Right?
it's
Like you
sustainability
also
and
need,
it's long term and you need middle class. You just need middle class. You cannot have
Mhm.
this inequality. Inequality is just cancer.
Right.
Um, Wonderful. Um, I'm gonna say these, and then I'll ask you what are the three things that everybody can do maybe today or soon to start. But I want to say these guys. Like I really like the book. What can go right? Because it just gives this huge perspective. It's like knowing what's happening in the world today. It's kind of like if you just read it just for that, I think it's wonderful because it talks about IA, it talks about like blockchain, it talks about all these things. So you want to be informed about what's happening today in the world. This is a great book just for that. But on top of that, you throw in the positive spin, the exercises of envisioning a new world, which we are not used to do that. And we need to learn to do this in schools and everywhere, right? Instead of
Right.
just being so reactive, like we were talking in the beginning, let's just be proactive and create our own culture and with a goal in mind, right? Then it becomes a really, really cool book that I think everybody should have. So thank you for writing the book.
Yeah.
And also, I would like you now to finish this dialogue with maybe three things that we can all do to bring about this thriving world that we all want.
Sure. Um, Thank you. Yeah. First of all, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And if you like the book, leave a review on Amazon. Helps me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Those
um,
help.
but so that maybe that's one. No. So for three, let's see. I'd say one is that sort of mindset shift, right? So
Yeah.
you see problems in the world, you see challenges. I guess start thinking about what that means in terms of an opportunity to solve a problem and to create a vision for what it would look like if it were better. So instead of just thinking like, here's why that person's wrong, or here's why this is terrible, start thinking about what would I do if I were in that situation? Or how can I recreate a system, whether that's a business or a solution or like product, that would be better. And that'll give you something to do. Two, think about it in terms of your own career and your own passion. What do you get excited about, right? Like when you're out studying, sustainability and society, are you excited about education? Are you excited about blockchain technology? Are you excited about the circular economy and recycling? Are you excited about the food system? I think going out and kind of put your finger in a bunch of different pies and trying to understand the big picture will help you kind of focus into, oh, I'm really excited about EVs. I want to get into that. So now is an amazing time to transition your career or get started in a career around climate. There's tons of new investments in startups. There's a ton of new jobs coming up in corporates and many entry points for people who want to get involved. So, please join in. And I think the idea that you have to, suffer or sacrifice in order to get involved in something that creates a positive change in the world is archaic. That's very old. You can make plenty of money. You can do well in your career by getting involved in climate and getting involved in ethical businesses. And these are actually faster growing markets that are bigger opportunities for you in your career. And you can thrive. And then with the extra money you make, you can give back by investing in new startups and new businesses that are doing something better, creating a new model or a new system, or nonprofits that are making an impact. So empower yourself and shift to that, and then find tangible ways of focusing your passion and your time and your expertise in that area. And that'll help us get to a better world. And then three, I guess, have these conversations with other people. When people get
Yep.
down and out, it's really easy to lose inspiration and to lose focus and become apathetic. And so if you see your friends or family, people going down that path, you don't have to recommend my book, but recommend some ideas that help them rethink of how amazing this world is that we live in today. And the fact that we live richer, more abundant lives than basically anyone in history, right? And challenge yourself to go back 100 years and sit in the old West and tell them how terrible it is that we've got too many phones in our hands,
Yeah,
right?
we have like
Um,
what hot water, whatever food you want, You can, I
Yeah.
mean, it's really amazing, at least here where we live, right?
Yeah.
Like you, I mean, I see plenty of bad things in the world, you know, and I'm not blind to that. I see corruption and all these things that frustrate me. But like you, I'm like an optimist. And I think we need to bring that back and recognize that the world is not what it is. The world is what we make of this world.
Yeah.
And we can create new
Absolutely.
things. And that's what is exciting, you know? So I love talking with people like you, Justin, because we sit down here in the present moment and think, okay, what can we do? We can actually make a difference. We can make it into such a wonderful world, you know, a paradise almost. So what is your time frame? Do you have a time frame for this? Prediction? What's going to happen in 25 years? What would you like to see?
I hope that we in 25 years have hit some of our climate targets. We are going to be going over, I believe, the 1.5 degree change. We're going to be seeing some pretty negative impacts of climate change. But I think we'll be far beyond turning the corner, and we'll have abundant renewable resources. We're going to have incredible, biotech innovations. The space economy is going to be, forgive my pun, taking off better than ever before. We're going to have immense amounts of data from around the planet. And we'll be thinking about how we use this all sustainable. And I think we'll look back, let's say in 100 years, and say, oh man, the world changed overnight. That's crazy. But from that perspective, it'll look like it changed overnight. But for us here living through it, this is, decades long, and it takes a lot of work and energy.
We are like, nothing's happening, but everything is happening.
Yeah. So I think we'll get there. And I think it'll be great for, everyone who gets involved, and even those who don't, right? That it should help to drag along all of society and civilization into a more ethical, sustainable, and abundant society than we've ever had before. And I'm excited for it. And I think there are some things that will go wrong, and we need to make sure we look out for them and be aware of them and come up with solutions for them, not just, be pessimistic that, oh, it's over now. Game's done. I'm out for the count, right? Like, just it's a lot more fun to create. So
absolutely, 100%. And I love it. Thank you so much for having this time today with us. I appreciate it, and looking forward to maybe staying in touch with you in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Justin.
The conversation, and thanks for inviting me on. Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.